They laughed when he said he'd change the world. They laughed when he dropped out of college. They laughed when he said computers would be personal. But no one was laughing when he built a $2 trillion legacy that still shapes our lives today. This is the story of Steve Jobs and how every rejection, every humiliation, every laugh he endured forged him into a visionary force the world couldn't ignore. Welcome to BizMind Forge, where unbreakable minds are crafted. 1972, Reed College, Oregon. Steve Jobs walks alone, barefoot, hungry, and completely unsure of what comes next. He had just dropped out, not because he was lazy, but because he refused to waste his adoptive parents' money on something that didn't align with his inner calling. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, Steve would later say, but he was curious. So he stayed, sleeping on the floor of friends' dorm rooms, returning Coke bottles for food money, and walking 7 miles every Sunday for a free meal at the Hare Krishna temple. He started attending classes he wasn't enrolled in. Calligraphy fascinated him, its beauty, precision, elegance. He had no idea that years later, it would define the Max typography. You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward. Steve Jobs wasn't following a path. He was forging one. Fast forward to 1976, a 21-year-old. Jobs and his engineering genius friend Steve Wozniak build the first Apple computer in a garage, not a startup with funding, not a tech lab, a dusty garage with parts bought on credit and hope stitched into every wire. When they showed Apple I to a local computer club, many shrugged. It's a toy, some said. Who needs a computer at home? Others mocked. But Steve didn't care. He saw what others couldn't. He walked into Byte Shop, a small retailer, and boldly convinced the owner to buy 50 computers. Then he scrambled to build them, borrowing parts, begging friends, pushing past every rejection. They said it couldn't be done. They said he was just a barefoot dropout. And yet, Apple Computer was born. This wasn't luck. This was mindset. 1984, the launch of the Macintosh. A bold commercial directed by Ridley Scott airs during the Super Bowl. It shatters the mold, just like Steve always wanted. But behind the scenes, Apple was cracking. Jobs' passion was unbearable to some. He was intense, demanding, relentless. The board of Apple, the company he founded, turned on him. By 1985, Steve Jobs was forced out of his own company. I was out, and very publicly out. Steve Jobs, imagine that for a moment. You build something from nothing, you bleed for it, and then they take it from you. What would you do? Most would fall apart, most would disappear, but Steve went back to work. He founded NEXT, a new computer company ahead of its time, and bought a small animation studio called Pixar. Rejection had not weakened him, it reforged him. At Pixar, he bet everything on a single movie, Toy Story. No one believed animated films could make money. They were wrong. Toy Story exploded. Pixar revolutionized animation. Meanwhile, Next's innovations were quietly changing computing, especially software design. In 1997, Apple was collapsing. And who did they call back? The man they had rejected, Steve Jobs. He returned, wiser, tougher, deadlier in vision. And over the next decade, he would lead Apple from near death to world dominance. The iMac, the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad. He didn't just build products, he reshaped industries. By 2010, Apple was the most valuable tech company in the world. Steve Jobs, the dropout, the reject, was now a legend. But behind the success was a man who knew his time was running out. He had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2003. Still he worked. Still he pushed. Still he created. Because the fire never left him. In his famous 2005 Stanford speech, he told graduates, Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. He knew. He always knew that every laugh, every rejection, every dismissal was fuel. And when he passed in 2011, he left behind more than products. He left behind a philosophy that your pain has purpose, that rejection is refinement, that you can forge something the world will never forget. Steve Jobs was gone from Apple. The company he once founded now saw him as a liability. He was 30, no college degree, no CEO title, no place to belong, but he wasn't done. He started something new, a tiny company with a strange name. Next, no fanfare, no glory, just a man with a bruised ego and a burning question in his heart. Am I really done? Or is this the beginning of something bigger? Steve poured every ounce of vision, detail, and obsession into Next. The hardware was revolutionary and wildly expensive. Investors mocked it. Tech writers laughed. The market rejected it. But here's what no one saw. While the world dismissed Next as a failure, Steve was reinventing himself. He wasn't just building a computer. He was rebuilding his mindset. Sometimes you need to be pushed out of your own empire to find the king within. Parallel to Next, Steve had quietly bought a small animation division from George Lucas for $5 million. It wasn't a business play. It was a curiosity. That company? Pixar. Steve had no idea how to run a movie studio, but he believed in people and stories and potential. Years passed. The world forgot Steve Jobs. And then in 1995, the world changed. Toy Story was released, the first ever full-length computer animated film. Pixar became a sensation overnight. Critics called it a miracle. Theaters overflowed. Steve Jobs, the man who was finished, was now the CEO of a billion-dollar phone company. And he owned 80% of Pixar. The same man who had been laughed out of Apple now had Hollywood's attention. But more importantly, he had something else, leverage. Apple was dying, stock price plummeting, market share evaporating. Executives lost, innovation dead. The board had only one option left. They called Steve. After 12 years in the wilderness, Steve Jobs walked back through the doors of Apple, not as a visitor, but as the only hope. The employees stared at him, some with awe, others with fear. Can he really save us? He's too weird, too demanding, too impossible. But Steve didn't come back to please anyone. He came back to build a revolution. He stood before Apple's team and said one thing: we're going to make Apple great again. Not by copying, not by playing it safe, but by doing the insanely great. He slashed dozens of products, fired entire departments, refused to follow the market trends. Instead, he brought a simple rule. Focus is about saying nitrogen monoxide. And from that mindset, that ruthless focus, came the first sign of rebirth, the iMac. Colorful, bold, different. It broke every design rule. It looked like a toy, but it sold like wildfire. Apple was back. Steve knew something others didn't. People don't just buy products. They buy identity. He launched Apple's most iconic campaign, Think Different. It wasn't about computers. It was about rebels, dreamers, misfits, because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. And suddenly, Apple wasn't a tech company. It was a movement. This wasn't about hardware. It was about who you could become. That's what made Steve Jobs different. He didn't just sell you a tool. He sold you belief. Each one a risk. Each one a revolution. And each one was laughed at in the beginning. People don't want to carry music in their pocket. Apple can't compete with Nokia or BlackBerry. A tablet? That's just a big phone. But Steve didn't care what people said. He cared what people felt. He didn't ask what the market wanted. He asked what the human soul needed. Connection, simplicity, beauty. And so he created tools that became extensions of identity. Design is not just what it looks like, it's how it works. Steve Jobs' Apple wasn't just back, it was unstoppable. In 2005, Steve stood at Stanford University to give a graduation speech. He was thin, quiet, reflective. Cancer had returned. His time was short, but his message, it was eternal. Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. Stay hungry, stay foolish. It wasn't just advice. It was a blueprint for every soul who had ever been told, you're not good enough, you're too different, you'll never make it. Steve was proof that rejection is not the end. It's the beginning of reinvention. Steve Jobs left this world in 2011, but his mindset echoes through every iPhone, every Apple store, every bold dreamer who dares to think different. But this story wasn't just about him. It's about you. You, the underestimated one, the misfit, the quiet visionary, the one who was told you can't. This channel, BizMind Forge, exists for you. To forge your mindset and fire, to turn your pain into power, to remind you that even rejection can become a $2 trillion legacy. If you felt even one spark of belief watching this, if Steve's journey reminded you of your own silent strength, then hit subscribe. Not for the algorithm, but for you. Because this is your forge, your story, and it's just getting started. Think different, live bold, forge your empire. BizMind Forge.